Now I will be introducing our morning keynote speaker. So David A. Grant. David A. Grant is here. He came all the way from New Hampshire to join us. Holy cow, he's been flying. He is a traumatic brain injury survivor and author of Metamorphosis: Surviving Brain Injury, a book that chronicles in a true-to-life detail his life as a brain injury survivor. His newest title, Slices of Life After Traumatic Brain Injury, was released in early 2015. David is also a contributing author to Chicken Soup for the Soul, brain injuries. I didn't even know there was that. That's actually really cool. As well as a regular contributing writer to brainline.org, a PBS-sponsored website. He is also the founder of TBI Hope and Inspiration, a Facebook community with over 17,000 members, including survivors, family members, caregivers, as well as members of the medical and professional community, and the founder and publisher of TBI Hope and Inspiration magazine. As a survivor of a cycling accident in 2010, he shares his experience and hope through advocacy work, including a public speaking as well as weekly brain injury blog. So lots to share with us today. Let's welcome David.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, can't hear me. Let's try this. Cool. Thumbs up, all right. You know, I share regularly that my comfort zone ends at the end of the ramp down there. There are a lot of folks that stand up here and they do it with a lot of grace and a lot of ease, and what you guys can't see is the perspiration pouring off my palms. And you know, it's funny, but she was reading off a list of the things that have come to pass since my injury back in 2010. And I was in the doorway listening, and I'm reflecting back on the comment that a well-respected neuropsychologist said to me at about a year after my accident. And he said, you know, you might as well kind of cash in the chips in your life because you're permanently disabled and you will not accomplish much. And he asked me to settle for a lesser life. And I'm very grateful that I did not heed his advice. The first thing that I want to do is offer a shout out to the planning committee, to John, to Tammy. These things don't happen by themselves. There's a huge amount of work that's involved in bringing this whole thing to life. It's a year's worth of planning. So let's give them all a hand for the work they've done. And I got to tell you, my wife and I, over the last couple of years, we were talking in the room this morning, and like, this is the last place I ever expected to be. And we've had the opportunity to do a lot of traumatic brain injury advocacy work across the country. And every conference has its own personality. And you guys are just the most fun-loving, raucous bunch of just kick-butt survivors that I've ever met. So this one's for you. You know, I'm a little ADD, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I'll go from here to there and there to here. And but I usually try and get back on track. And the other thing you may see me do regularly is check my watch. And it's not that I have a plane to catch. We don't fly out till tomorrow. I've got a whole cacophony of things that have happened that are really bizarre since my brain injury. One of them is I've lost the ability to tell linear time. Time has no meaning to me anymore. So I could feel like I'm up here for 5 minutes and look at my watch and go, oh, darn, an hour's gone. And part of what I've tried to do over the years is to take a look and say, okay, what are my TBI blessings? And like, that's a really good thing to have when you have 6 hours of flights from New Hampshire, because you get on the plane, they give you the peanuts, and then you land. And for me, it's like, literally, it feels like 10 or 15 minutes. And I watch my poor wife, Sarah, sitting next to me after like 4.5 hours squirming, and I'm like, well, we just got in the air. You know? So there's an element of surrealism to it all. But part of what I love to do is, you know, this is my life's work is realized when I share my story with other survivors. You guys are like so my people. You know, I love you all. whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a family member, whether you're here as a member of the medical, professional, or support community. You guys just kick butt. And I love the, I also have no filter. So all bets are off too. The first time I keynoted was back in 2013, and I found myself uttering a 4-letter word, and it wasn't my intent. And I was just talking to a new friend and this morning, and we talked about the disconnect between what's up here and what comes out. So I'm going to try not to offend anyone, and hopefully you guys will give me a couple of mulligans. But the piece that I love is like the meeting other survivors and other people that are part of this just amazing family. And it seems like every conference there are a couple of people that just steal my heart. I was down in the workout center for the last couple of mornings. I'm an endurance cyclist, and if I remember, I'll circle around to where that picture was taken. And I'm a creature of habit, and if I'm not on my bike, I'm thinking about being on my bike. I push out 25 miles a day almost every day, some days 30. Once a year I do a 100-mile bike ride just to prove I can. I got 55 coming this year, and I refuse to let age hold me back. And I'm down yesterday morning, and I walked in, and there were 2 stationaries, and it's like watching paint dry. It's just not that much fun, but, you know, a member of the professional community years ago said, there is documented evidence that shows that pushing highly oxygenated blood through your brain speeds brain injury recovery. So not only do I do it because it keeps the weight off, keeps the mental edge sharp, but it's also good for my brain. And I walked into the workout room yesterday morning, and there was a woman on a stationary, and I said, "Hey, how are you?" Because like I'm not a typical New Englander. I'm like friendly, and a lot of them. They're no offense to anybody here who may be offended, but they're generally closed up there, and I feel misplaced at birth. And Sarah was born in Tampa, so she gets it. And I walked in, and I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" She said, "Oh, blessed." And it's funny, and a lot of you guys can identify, like, we can spot each other in a crowd. You know, if you're around and, like, you're at the checkout at the supermarket and somebody's in front of you, and whether it's, like, maybe a missed gate or a missed word or a misstep, like, we can pick each other out of a crowd. And I love that. And we'll walk out of a store regularly and say, wow, there's another member of the club. You know, and it's wonderful because a lot of us, not for all of us, but for a lot of us, it's invisible. You wouldn't know. So she said, "Oh, blessed." And my first thought was, she's got to be one of us. And we started chit-chatting a little bit, and she quickly stole my heart. "Where are you?" There she is, right here. And here's what I love about survivors is, you know, I forget stuff all the time, and she forgot her workout shoes. Do you mind if I share this? Okay, I should probably ask first. And but she's over there in her socks pushing like there's no tomorrow. And I got to tell you, it's that, and I see that in so many different ways with survivors that push really hard to get well. And it's that tenacity that I am not going to let this beat me. You know, I'm going to move forward against all odds. And you know what? If I don't have my shoes, who cares? I'm going to do it anyway. You know? And, you know, every conference we go to, I've got a few people that I put on the TBI hero list. So you're one of my heroes. And actually, you guys are all heroes. But and fate is funny. I also live with PTSD, which makes crowds terrifying. And being in big places terrifying. We went down to the marketplace on Saturday by the waterfront, and I went, oh. But you have to do it because we're tourists, and that's what we do when we're in town. And so generally when we attend venues like this, we're kind of hanging out on the side. I like edges, and it's how I'm wired. And we got to meet Jody and Haley, who are really new to this journey. And you guys stole our hearts. You know, you were right where we were when we were just starting, just trying to figure everything out. And the biggest thing, you know, I look at the TBI Club as you've got TBI old-timers that have been doing this for a long time. A good friend of mine, he's a writer for our publication as well. Jeff Siebel is a 40-year survivor. We were in Baltimore 2 weeks ago. I had the opportunity to present down there. Their crab is actually not quite as good as your crab up here, but it held a it held a close second. And Jeff's a 40-year survivor, and just a great guy. But when I first started to become connected to other survivors, people that have been around for a while said, it's going to get easier. And I didn't believe it. Maybe for you it's going to get easier, but my life sucks right now. And it's not going to get easier for me. But what I tried to hold on to is I tried to hold on to their belief. You know, if you say it's going to get better and it got better for you, maybe it might get better for me. And what I've learned is that getting better isn't necessarily getting back to normal. And I heard somebody the other day talk about, yesterday, the new normal. And I try not to, you know, and I respect everybody has different opinions, and I play very well with others. But I look at it more as, because there's not a whole lot that's normal about living a TBI life. It's very surreal. It's unexpected. It's got amazing components that come with it, but it's really hard sometimes. So I just, you know, what I've come to find is that, you know, I try to embrace that I am a brain injury survivor, and my new normal is more, how do I regain my footing as a member of humanity? You know, I was a member of humanity before I was a brain injury survivor. When I was born, the doc didn't slap me on the butt and say, congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, you've got a little TBI kid, you know. So part of what I try to do is find ways to become back as part of and integrated into humanity as best I can. Meanwhile, accepting that I will always be a little bit different than the uninjured. And so when they said it would get better, I think to define better is it exists in my reality today, because you guys know, especially those that have been around for a while, reality changes, and the way your reality is perceived today is different than it was last year. I'm doing things now in my 6th year that I couldn't do in my 5th year, so there's this whole shape-shifting component to it all. But my reality today is that if I can find a way to live and coexist with my brain injury and not have it kick the you-know-what out of me every day, and find a way to be reasonably happy, then I'm doing all right. So part of what I like to do is kind of like a before, during, and after, and talk a little bit about what my life was like before the injury. Sarah and I talked at length. I tend to get a little winded about the actual accident, and I find that for a lot of us. You know, I said to her just the other day, yeah, I feel like part of why I was put on this earth is to listen to people. You know, and when I meet a lot of you guys, I say, you know, tell me what happened, and you're always very willing and open and ready to share your story. And I embrace your story, because when you share your story, you feel less alone, and when you share your story with me, I feel a little less alone. So my to kind of you know, I can go way back and say I'm the son of a school teacher and a rocket scientist, but that's not really pertinent. And my dad was a rocket scientist, but that's another story. You know, I've had the opportunity to live 2 lives. You know, in my life before my brain injury, I was a web developer. I was a wannabe writer. I ran a very successful small business. I had clients all over the world, mostly in the U.S. I had married the girl of my dreams a little over a year before my accident. We had what I like to call a wedding that was sponsored by the New Hampshire Department of Tourism. We were married in August on the New Hampshire coast, the rocky coast. Probably not as rocky as the coast you have here, but it was beautiful. And it was under a nice August sun. It was just perfect. The entire wedding party was barefoot, 80-degree day, pristine blue sky with like 4 strategically placed white puffy clouds. None of us were wearing shoes. We got married under an archway that was covered with sunflowers, and between the 2 of us, we have 8 kids, and they're all adults now, but we waited for a lot of years, and we finally thought, this is our time. You know, we're gonna hunker down for the rest of our lives and like live happily ever after. And that changed a little too. And we got married and kind of settled into our new life, and we came back from our honeymoon to 5 teenagers in the house. And yeah, it is what it is. The whole thing is just an amazing ride. It's just very exciting, and it's wonderful, and it's so lest I go too far down that path. And we settled into building a new life together as one family instead of 2 families. And I didn't realize until after my accident that every day that I went out to ride, Sarah thought of herself very much like a cop's wife. She'd wave goodbye at the door, never knowing whether I would come back or not. I never knew she thought that. You know, you hear stories regularly of people coming out and not coming home. And on November 11th, 2010, I went out for what should have been a standard. I was pushing out 30 miles a day at the time. And it should have been just a very standard bike ride. But it wasn't, because if it was, you'd have somebody else up here today and I'd still be in New Hampshire. I was at mile 23, and I read a piece a couple of weeks ago about when you talk about your trauma, in a very real sense, you relive it. And the conversation that, to circle back to what I had said earlier that we had, she said, you know, you talk a lot about your accident, but part of it is when I share the events of that day, you all can connect the dots with things that have happened to you or those close to you, or perhaps those that you're charged with taking care of professionally. I was at mile 23, and I was at an intersection that I'd biked through 100 times before, and a bunch of you guys have heard the story or read about me as I've journaled about it over the years. And I get to a very familiar intersection, and to add a little bit of a qualifier, the one trait that I do have that is part of my quintessential New Englandism is I'm a little conservative. You know, I don't cycle like a courier. I wear the neon colors. I've got a helmet. When I see somebody without a helmet, it's easy to get involved in profanity. You go, what are you thinking? You don't want to end up like me. And I get to an intersection that I've been through 100 times, and I remember looking to the left, mentally going, clear. Looking to the right, clear. And I gave one push with my pedal. And in that one moment of time, between two heartbeats, the old David ceased to exist. The police estimate that the young man who T-boned me was doing somewhere between 30 and 40 miles an hour. We found out after the fact that he was driving right into a setting sun, totally blinded. As is, there are a lot of what I've learned are TBI injustices, and a lot of you guys I know have experienced them. And I've learned that sometimes life's just not fair. It's just not fair, you know. There's no, things just happen, and you know, what are you going to do with what's happened to you? And me and DJ met by accident, and it's funny how your mind tries to sort through things that are happening and make them appear like they make sense when extreme trauma strikes. And I remember flying through the air, and only when I was airborne did I hear the sound of my body hitting the windshield. So I was airborne soaring, and then I heard the sound in my head. And the best way I can describe it is a time stretched. Physics are what physics are, and I should only have been in the air for probably a second or two. But I can remember it with a lot of clarity. And I remember soaring through the air, doing what I fondly called my Superman act over the years, called my Superman act. And I looked down, and it was 3:44 in the afternoon. You know, and it's funny. You guys, anybody who's a survivor in here, you know the date. Many of you know the time. You may not remember your accident or the incident, but you know the date that everything changed. It's like my second birthday. And I looked down, and I could see the sun shining through the mica in the blacktop, and it was sparkly like Disney. And I went, wow, that's really cool. And then my next thought is, oh shit, I get hit by a car. And then my next thought after that, because I was soaring for, in my mind, it was another 30 seconds going, this is pretty cool, but it's really going to suck when I hit the ground. My apologies for the profanity, but that's kind of what I was thinking. And I was a year out before I finally realized, or was laid out a scenario of events. If you'd asked me during that first year, were you knocked out cold? The answer was no, I wasn't knocked out cold at all. Like, I remember it. I remember that whole Superman act. And I had a neuropsych assessment at 12, 13 months. And the doc said, he said, tell me what happened afterwards. I said, well, I got hit, and then I opened my eyes, and there were a whole lot of people around me, and one piece that is seared forever up here is there was a bystander that was looking down at my body like this with their hand over their mouth. And I remember the tears. And I'm like, oh my God, I may die. I might die today. And the neuropsychologist said, so do you think they just appeared like that? He said it took time for them to go there, to surround me at the accident scene. So in that moment, my reality shifted. 12, 13 months out, I went, oh my God, I was knocked out cold and I never knew it. So I'm laying there on Main Street, and I'm a lucky guy. Not everybody lives through an accident like this. I'm grateful to be here. And I was laying there, and I was hit only a block and a half from our local fire station. And passersby had stopped, and I'm like trying to pull my helmet off, and at that time I couldn't move the left-hand side of my body. And I'm trying to pull my helmet off, and people are doing what they should do. Don't move, help's on the way. And I'm trying to take my helmet off, and I'm trying to do a quick assessment, and I went, okay, I can wiggle my toes, my spine is intact. And that was the first big thank you, God. A lot of thank you, gods. And the emergency first responders came. Are there any first responders here today? There may or may not be. We love you guys, man. You guys save lives. Thank you. And the first responders came, and I'm a little older now, and they all look like kids, I don't know, time kind of passed a little too quickly without my permission. And they put the back brace under me and got me up in the ambulance. They actually dropped me when they were getting me in the ambulance. And I didn't laugh, and I don't think they did either, but it doesn't really matter. It was just a part of the narrative. And they're, as I was laying on the blacktop in just an absolute world of pain, I kept chanting out my wife's number, her cell phone number, 205-2422. It's funny, I can use a number in places where you guys will forget the number anyway. So, and no offense. Hey, yep, thank you. Oh, somebody just labeled themselves as possibly not being a survivor. Thank God for these, by the way, because I can look down and pretend that I remember your name. Hey, good to see you again, Steve. So I'm calling up my wife's cell phone number, and a passerby named Jim called my wife and said, your husband was in a bad accident, and they're taking him to the hospital. And I have trouble playing connect the dots with how things came to pass, but I know that within a couple of miles, she was in her car following the ambulance to the nearest trauma center was across state lines down in Massachusetts. And it was just a train wreck of a day. Nobody really gets up in the morning and says, hey, get milk, go for a ride, get hit by a car, and maybe watch The Big Bang Theory. That'll be a nice day. That's not how you plan your day. And she was behind the ambulance following it to the nearest trauma center. Fact check, I just have to see if, I don't know if it's 10 o'clock or not. And we get down there, and because I was immobilized in the ambulance, and you guys that have been there know, what day is it? Who's the president? What's the date? What are your kids' names? Making sure I'm clear and present, and as they pulled me out of the ambulance, Sarah's face came into view, and it was all swollen from crying, and I could see the tears in her eyes. And I joke about anything, and I joke about things, we've talked about it, that would offend most sensibly minded folks. But humor is a really big tool when you live in this bizarre world of TBI. And they're wheeling me, and I saw her face, and I pulled a line out of a Charlie Brown Christmas, and behold, the face of an angel. And so I was still kind of there. And I got to speed it up a little bit because I want to talk more about life now. So I'll kind of fast forward. So they brought me into the hospital, into the trauma center. They did a CAT scan, and they said, "Oh, congratulations, you're fine. You're fine. Yeah, you're good." And well, and I know you guys are laughing because some of you have heard it. You look normal. You look normal. How can you have a problem? You look fine. Yeah. Step inside my head for about 20 minutes, and then you tell me what fine looks like. And I had a broken elbow. Sarah spent the next few days pulling shards of glass out of my head. My helmet was toast. Pulled a bunch of tendons, and I walked out of there with looking like I'd been run over by a car. I had marching orders to see a neurologist the very next day and to see an orthopedist, and we did both the next day. The orthopedist put a permanent cast on me and said, "Well, you'll have the cast for 3 months, and in 6 months your pain will be gone." And he nailed it, almost to the day. 3 months, the cast was gone. 6 months to the day, no more pain. And because injuries like broken bones have a predictable timeline for recovery. Injuries like traumatic brain injury have no timeline at all. They have their own timeline that's unique to all of us. You know, that doctor could see 100 people with the same breaks and tell them the same thing. Cast for 3 months, you'll be fine in 6. But he can see 100 of us with a TBI, and he can't say this is what it's going to be like at 3 or 6. It's just so different for all of us. So we went to the neurologist, and he did what's called a Montreal cognitive test. It was 10 or 12 questions that Sarah still, I swear, knows 8 of them. And she could probably tell me what the neurologist was wearing that day. And I passed with flying colors. And he said, "Congratulations again, you've dodged a bullet. You know, no CAT scan was clean, and you're a lucky guy, and you don't even need to come back to see me." You know, and so we kind of, another thank you God, it could have been worse, and hunkered down to the business of healing. And that was November of 2010. I lost most of 2011. I don't have a lot of memories of an entire year. It's kind of creepy looking at pictures going, well, look at, there I am doing this, here I am doing that, here I'm doing this, while I'm doing this. And while I was there in body, I was kind of checked out. I wrote a book in what amounts to be a TBI blackout. I journaled all the time. And occasionally I read my own book. You guys can't tell anybody this. I read my own book to remember what happened. You know, and part of what I do is I was journaling, and I didn't intend on putting a book out there. I had one of my early reviewers say and this isn't an unsolicited plug because it's not about book sales. It's about connecting with other survivors and offering hope. But she said, "I just can't figure out how you wrote such an amazing book so early in your recovery." And part of what happened is as I was journaling, I was doing it in real time. So I would feel the pains of wanting to kill myself, and I'd write about it. So it was raw and unfiltered and real. So, and that's the ADD thing kicking in, so I'll circle back again. So I thought, well, I just need to recover. But somewhere on the inside, I didn't feel right. I knew, like, something isn't right. Like, I can't put a finger on it, but I don't feel right. And one of my biggest fears, and I shared it with Sarah over and over again, is I said, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And she said, what guy is that? And I said, that guy that they, you know, they, not us, but them, that they say, that guy has never been the same since his accident. And like, I had that as a fear. I didn't want to be like forever changed. I'm that guy, you know? And like right now in this sacred space that we're sharing, it's okay to be that guy, you know? We hunkered down to try and heal. And I had a couple of things that came to pass that let me know things weren't quite right. The first one was actually in the trauma center where they were doing their assessment, and all of a sudden I'm laying there, and all of a sudden it felt like I was being pulled out of my body and looking at my own body. If you've never experienced it, you know, the Discovery Channel doesn't do it justice. And I was like looking at everything from outside. And Sarah was looking over me, and she said, you know, at that moment I disappeared. And I don't know whether she saw the sparkle gone. And she said, hey, pulled over a dock and said, something's going on here. I don't want to cry. This isn't where I should be crying. I'll save that for later. Sarah said to me this morning, no crying today. And the doc came over, and by that time I was back. And that was the first indication maybe I had some neuro challenges that I didn't know. I've got a lot of nicknames, and I get together with a bunch of friends on a Wednesday night at a local college, and I bake brownies. And I bake 300-400 pounds of brownies a year. We get together and socialize, and those guys call me Baker David. And that was in accident was in November. This would have been roughly January. Timelines are a little bit loose. And I went to bake, and I picked up the box of brownies, and I looked at the letters on the box of brownies, and I couldn't read. I lost the ability to read. And if you just imagine for a minute that we're not right here, but by some magic we were transported this whole room to Tokyo. And you opened up the doors and you weren't here anymore, but all of the signs on a bustling street were written in a different language. You would recognize that those symbols meant letters, but you couldn't read them. But you would be able to intuitively know this means something. And that's what it was like. I looked at my box of brownies and went, this means something, but I can't correlate it to words. So it was a panic call to the neurologist, and he had us come in for a second visit, and gave me one of those intelligent doctorly things and said, you probably have a concussion. And he said, you know, that ill at ease in my core was continuing to grow, and he said, you're going to be okay, and you're going to be back to normal. Whatever the timeline was presented a number of different ways, but somewhere I think 6 months to a year, you'll be normal again. You'll be back to 100%. And we left that visit, and like, we're really resilient, no pun intended, wherever you are. And inside joke. And you know, a friend of mine on Facebook's nickname is Resilient. A lot of you guys know her, and she's here. Hi, Donna. And because she's resilient, you know. And so we left, and there was no like sadness. There was no, oh my God, I've got a concussion. We had a timeline. You know, okay, we'll be back to normal in 6 months to a year. You get older, time passes quicker, and like, no big deal. And then the second event came, and that one I know was in March of 2011. By that time, I was back on a bike, and I made the decision I'm going to go out and do 30 today, because I'm obsessed and a little bit OCD and ADD and all those other letters. And I was about 2 blocks from my house, and I looked down at the little device that I was using to log my miles, thinking, I can't wait to do a really nice ride today. You know, wonderful March day, you know, crocuses are coming up, the snow's disappearing. And by that time, PTSD had a foothold really deep into my life, and I was incapable of going on busy streets. So I was back on a bike, but sticking close to quiet streets. And I looked down at the recording device, and it said that I'd already done 30 miles. I had no memory, none. And it was shocking, you know. And again, at this time, I still wasn't diagnosed as having a traumatic brain injury. And I pedaled back to the house, and everything was, it was like hyper reality. I remember walking over to the bushes. My mind said, oh my God, David, you're in a coma. And I'm like, I'm well grounded. I'm sane. I don't have any like neuroses or like, I'm just a pretty average guy from the neck up except for a brain injury. So it's not like I've got this long history of psychoses. But I'm looking around going, I'm in a coma. And everything here is stuff that my mind manufactured so my body could heal. And I touched the bushes, and I'm like, wow, it's just amazing what your mind can manufacture. And I went in, and I rarely sleep during the day, and I laid down and promptly crashed for hours. The next day, we were at the neurologist again, and he said, well, your concussion is a little worse than I thought, and it's probably going to take you 5 years to recover. Rest assured, 5 years, you'll be normal again. You know what normal is? Normal is a setting on a washing machine. And he also diagnosed me with post-concussive syndrome, and brought me in to see the head doctor in the practice and said, by the way, and that doctorly thing going on again, he's like, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder too. And I want to talk a little bit about the PTSD component because a lot of us are doubly blessed with PTSD and TBI. And when he had diagnosed me with PTSD, my first thought was, you think? Because the reality that I lived in was miserable. Absolutely overwhelming nightmares for the first close to 2 years. I would wake up, the first year was, I called it TBI hell. It was just absolutely horrible, worst thing that I've ever gone through in my life. I don't recommend it to anyone. If you have the chance and you've not yet had a TBI, don't get one. And you know, 15, 20, 25 nights a month, I'd wake up, I was textbook PTSD. The nightmares usually happen really early on in your sleep cycle. And it was, my witching hour was 11:45 to 12:15, and I'd wake up yelling, screaming, crying. And I know that some of you guys have it, so I won't talk about the details because triggers are what triggers are. But suffice to say, I was harmed and mutilated and experienced trauma over and over and over again after dark. That was just debilitating. So I walked around for months and months with both the emerging awareness that I had a more significant injury than I thought I had, coupled with the chronic exhaustion that comes with never sleeping. And it's funny, I'm 5 years, 4 months, and about 3 weeks out, and I do count. And I've had one full night's sleep since 2010. You know, neurofatigue is a funny thing, and I don't want to diminish it, but you kind of get used to being tired all the time. And it's a case of, okay, do I stay tired and do nothing, or do I live my life tired? I live my life tired, you know. So the doc said, yeah, you've got a nice case of PTSD. This is a lot of the initials kept coming in. You've got PCS, and that's when I was given the 5-year recovery, and even that didn't bother me because, again, it's 5 years, it's 5 years, you know. That'll take a little longer. And but he also said something shocking, and this is another one of the TBI injustices that we experienced along the way. He said, I can't help you anymore. And we liked him. We bonded with this guy. He was young. He was energetic. And he said, you know, and he pulled out a business card and said, see, you're not even on what I take care of. And if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. And he said, we're going to get, in our area, there's this big push on getting you to a, quote, Boston doctor. Boston doctors are supposed to be really good doctors. And there's a lot of amazing, amazing health care down there, but he said, we're going to get you down to a really good doctor in Boston that can help you. Because I was a wreck. And we went over by the checkout area, and he had his receptionist, and they kind of fumbled with papers for a little while and said, well, we'll get back to you. And we walked out, and I said to Sarah, you know, they're not going to get back to us. And nobody ever got back to us. And the hardest thing with TBI, one of the hard things, especially early on, is at the time that you need to be able to self-advocate, you're most compromised. So it's like saying, I want you to run a marathon, but we're going to, you know, tie your feet together. You know, you need to be able to self-advocate, but you can't do it when you don't have the ability to do it. So that first year continued to unfold as, again, the most horrible year of our existence. Sarah likened it to having a newborn in the house. And we both walked around just constantly exhausted, knowing that something wasn't right. The nightmares were just overwhelming. We live within about 4 blocks of a secondary fire station. Every time an ambulance would go by, I'd be reduced to tears, more PTSD stuff kicking around. So I'm either crying, exhausted, laying in bed at night, totally terrified to go to sleep, wondering how I'm going to be harmed that night. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And it was somewhere in that first year that I decided that suicide would be a really good thing to do. You know, I'm like, I can't do it. And I justified it because, again, not having the best executive function capability, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I thought about it and went, okay, I've got $250,000 in life insurance. She can pay off the house. I'm thinking of ways, like I had plans that I was trying to, how can I make my death work so that Sarah can collect the life insurance? It's not labeled a suicide, and she can go through, and she'll mourn for 4 or 5 years, but she's a beautiful young woman that has a heart of gold, so like she'll find love again, and in 20 years, we'll be like the Titanic. I'll never let go, and she'll be the old lady, and I'll be the memory from years ago. And and I came really close. And I would say to her, I'm just having a day with a lot of dark thoughts. And I didn't say, by the way, I want to kill myself today, past the Grey Poupon. I just, I want it off. And I had two things that happened in that first year that were game changers. The first one was that I found a local TBI support group. And oh my God, when I walked in and saw all the information about support groups, and a friend of mine on Facebook posted, Donna posted, we're coming here with our support group. And I'm a huge believer that peer-to-peer support saves lives. You know, I've talked to a couple of folks here who this is their first experience around other survivors. And I know that it's like walking from the darkness into the light where you go, wow, I get it. You know, there are others that are just like me. You know, there are other zebras in the herd. I don't have to hang out with, the non-zebras all the time. See, I was looking for another, you guys didn't even know it. That's a compensatory workaround strategy. When I can't find words, I find ways to describe words. So we can just use the fill in your favorite African animal here. And I walked into my first support group and thought I was in the wrong place. Because I walked in, there were a couple of folks there, and I didn't know what I was to expect, I didn't know, people drooling, I don't know, I just didn't know. And I'm like, oh, I think I got the wrong room. And my friend Don, who's still a good friend of mine, said, if you're looking for the people who have issues here, you're in the right place. And I'm like, and again, we spot it, we know each other, and I'm like, wow. And I didn't even, at that time, I didn't know about mental filters. I've learned more from the survivor community than I have from a lot of the other folks that have been paid dearly by my insurance company. There's just an immense knowledge pool that you can tap into with people that have been in this community for a long time. And I stayed there. The meeting was supposed to last for an hour, but we stretched it out to 90 minutes, and the reality is that nobody wanted to leave. For all of us, it was like our first time getting together and being with each other. And I took the long way home, and I cried all the way home, just tears like a baby, like that baby, whatever that baby was. Just crying. And I'm like, oh my God, like that, just relief, like that sense of being isolated. I didn't even have hope, because a lot of them were about my timeline, but I had relief knowing I wasn't alone anymore. And I cried all the way home, and Sarah opened the door and saw me and wrapped her arms around me, and so that piece came to play in the first year. And the other piece is I started seeing a mental health counselor who actually is familiar with TBI. And I found over the years that I've been playing in this new, absolutely colorful, fun, amazing playground of folks, is that most folks, there's very little gray. You either get it or you don't. And I was talking to somebody about this sometime over the last couple of days. Over the years, we found that if you don't get it, have a great day. We love you. Thanks for what you're doing, but you're not for us. Next. And I don't want to sound harsh or impersonal. There's a wrench for every nut, and I'm the nut, and you're not my wrench. And but I went to see a mental health counselor that Pamela Sollenberger. She's like 5'2", 80 pounds wet, and just pure energy. And she'd kick my butt if I let her. And she saved my life, and she knows it. And I was able to impartially, because my wife isn't my counselor, and it's not fair for me to unload everything on my wife. And I was able to go in and say, look, Pamela, I want to kill myself. And she looked at me, and she walked to the little table between us, and she's like looking up at me. And she grabbed me by the arms, and she said, if I really think you're going to do something, you know what I have to do. And I happen to like doorknobs and my shoelaces, and what she was saying is that we'll have to take measures to make sure you don't harm yourself. And I made a solemn promise to her that if I was going to kill myself, that I would talk to her first. And that promise still lives. I haven't thought about suicide since 2011. That's gone. Well, And so, it's funny, but when I talk about wanting to off myself, I look around and I won't call anybody out, but you see heads going like this because you guys get it. It's a hard journey, And I'm grateful today that, because if I had done that, we'd be coming up on the 5-year anniversary of, me being planted somewhere in the ground in New Hampshire. And I got a life to live. I've got kids. And people who love me and stepkids and just this, you guys, oh my God, you guys are like, my life's purpose is realized when I can help you guys. I said a prayer before I came down here this morning. God, help me to help as many people as I can. Non-denominational, so whatever's out there. So I started to hunker down into the reality of what do we need to do to get well, because brain injury doesn't affect just me; it affects all of us. It affects my it still affects my wife. It affected my kids. The other piece, and I'll circle back around. Somewhere in that first year, a vicious rumor started to circulate that I was faking my brain injury, and because after all, this conference is a blast. There are a lot of survivors here. I've been to some conferences that are just equally as fun, but there are a lot more medical professionals. And if I show up in a suit, you don't know whether I'm a neurologist or not. I can talk the talk. Let's talk about neuroplasticity for a while, And and people look at me when I say, oh, yeah, I got a brain injury. Yeah, sure you do. And the rumor started that I was faking my brain injury and my kids were sucked into a reality that wasn't true. And my oldest son walked out of my life first. He was followed, actually he was second. My second son, I have 4 sons, my second son walked out first. November of 2011 was the last time I had a conversation with my oldest son. He was at a cookout one day in November. My mom and dad were down, and we're talking about life, and that's the last time I've talked to him. He got married last year, I found out on the internet. My third son disappeared sometime after that, and then for a while my fourth son said, Dad, just admit it, you're faking this whole thing, and he left. So here I am in the space where full-blown nightmares, no sleep, my life is ruined, my kids have all left, and then it's like, why does suicide not look good? I made the decision at some point that I need to rebuild my life and be there for the people around me. And the journey began. It was kind of like the road took a turn. And these days I'm very careful about the people that I allow into my inner circle. There are 2 types of people, those that support you and will help you get well, and those that are indifferent or don't have your best interests at heart. And the people that have shown over time to be supportive, those relationships are cherished and nurtured and appreciated. And I tell the people close to me now, I love you more than I ever have. That loss of a filter is such a blessing because I can tell you what I feel. And you don't have to say, what do you mean, David? I want to talk a little bit about compensatory strategies and some of the things that have come to pass. And I've talked far too long about the nasty stuff because it's a lot of good has emerged, out of every season of suffering where the hand of fate seems heavy or unjust. You develop new resources and you learn new lessons. And I have found, and I say it all the time, after our injury, we've been exposed to a subculture of people that fly just beneath the radar screen of humanity that are all just so giving and so wonderful and such an integral part of the traumatic brain injury community. They're amazing, giving souls that we've met that we just never knew existed. So the first thing that, one of the biggest things that we have found, I won't tell anybody what to do because that's not my job. Your journey is your journey, mine is mine, but I'll share some of the things that have worked for us. We have surrounded ourselves with people that get it about traumatic brain injury. And that has been a game changer. I work very hard on acceptance, and my definition of the new normal or the new reality has changed. For the first 2 to 3 years, I had this hidden fantasy that I would be that 1 in a million that would get back to the old person that he used to be. And I've now given up on that happily. It's a lot of freaking work to try and like pretend, Santa Claus off the list, Easter Bunny off the list, ever getting back to David version 1.0 off the list. And now that I'm not fighting to get back to who I used to be, I've got more resources to be who I'm supposed to be. So I'm freeing up stuff to embrace this new life. Every injury is different, but there are a lot of things that are common. I was left with a really bad case of tinnitus after my accident. I haven't had a silent day since 2010. And it's funny, but I'm jumping back into the neurologist ring again. We've got an appointment with a specialist in a few weeks. Things changed a couple of months ago, and my ear ringing, the volume doubled, and it stayed that way. And one thing that I've learned is that there's always going to be changes, and like that's okay. If you come into our backyard now, see, compensatory strategies can be hidden, and the rest of the world doesn't know what we're doing. We started with aquatic gardening a couple of years ago with a single waterfall, and like being a little bit OCD and compulsive, that one waterfall turned into a pond on a little fountain on the deck. And our koi that we got as little baby are now 18 inches, 2 feet. So last year we built another pond with more waterfalls. And you walk into our backyard and all you can hear is water everywhere and fish. And what you don't realize is you're seeing an outward manifestation of a compensatory strategy. If I go out there and it's like nothing but waterfalls, and my wife and I are huge fans of Disney, and that whole magic, and you walk in the backyard now and go, wow, that's like really cool. And because I have no more filter, I try things that I never would have before. A couple of years ago, I said, let's do something different, and I painted our back and front door and mailbox bright purple. And they're still purple, and I love it. And every now and again, I forget that I did it, and I go, oh, look, the door's purple. Yeah. When did I do that? Yeah, who did that? Who painted our door? I love you guys. Oh, my God. See, we get it. Or the other one is like, David, do you know you've told me that 5 times already? No? Can I tell you again? And we've been slowly walling out the outside world. We're on a little bit of a busy street, and we've got stockade fence around the backyard. And I started muraling this year. And when you walk out in the backyard, if you look straight out, you see an amazing Arizona sunset with the saguaro cactus and the nice orange gradients. I'm like, wow, I can paint. Wow, who knew? And the funny thing is, I like to paint stuff that we've been to, and we were up at the Grand Tetons a few years ago. So the next few panels are all really sharp, jagged, snow-covered mountains with firs underneath and water elements. And I looked out at the mountains that you all have here, and I'm like, oh my God, those are our mountains. So you walk into the backyard and you see that, and I found that not only the intent was to just create something that was fun, but I found that the process of painting is cathartic as well. And I'm going to stress it again, the importance of being around people who get it. Some of the things that have come to pass, and I'm uncomfortable talking about this stuff because this is very much a we space. This is a we space. This isn't a me space. This is a we space. We're all in this together. But part of the reason that I have to share some of the things that have come to pass is the doctor who at a year out said, basically put your life in a suitcase, put it on the top shelf, get a little handicap placard for your car, and settle for less. Was dead wrong. And I like to prove doctors wrong. No offense to any doctors at all. I've met so many people who have defied outcomes that were predicted, who were told, oh my goodness, we had one of the writers for our magazine was told, her parents said, you got to pull the plug because she's not going to make it. And she's written for our publication, and this room is full of, each one of you guys has a story, and so I'm uncomfortable talking a lot about it, but I have to just to let you know that the sky's the limit. The biggest limits that I've learned are the ones that I place on myself. I started journaling that first year, and I bound everything together, and it came out in 2012 under the name Metamorphosis: Surviving Brain Injury, and I just put it out there. And I had there's a company on the East Coast called Neuro Restorative. They run long-term post-acute care centers. And one of the senior level executives read my book and bought a few cases and made it mandatory reading for his senior staffers and called it the best insight into what it's like living with a traumatic brain injury that he'd ever read. And I found that by putting information out there, people were helped. And I may be naive, but I want to change the world. And that's not ego. You never underestimate the reach of the internet and the power of a small group of focused people to go out there and really make a difference. Our face-to-face support group, we just had our 5-year anniversary. I'm now a co-facilitator. We started a small Facebook community where we could connect because once a month it was great to see everybody, but what do you do for 29 days between seeing everybody? So we started a small Facebook community because we don't have the resources that you have here. And it was nice to be able to connect, and I went, you know, there's a bigger world out there. Maybe we can create a space where folks can come in and check in and realize they're not alone and move on in their day. So I started TBI Hope and Inspiration on Facebook. And sometime this past weekend, we had 18,000 members. And last month, and I'm still a numbers geek, I didn't lose that since my accident, the posts that were out there were either liked, shared, or viewed almost 750,000 times. And I look back and go, man, I'm sitting in a 10 by 12 office in New Hampshire, and people all over the world are able to get a little bit of hope and a little bit of inspiration. I was a writer for a magazine called, people started calling on me, can you write for us? Brainline. Brainline is just wonderful. I don't know if any of you know Rosemary Rollins. She's my editor there, and I submit a monthly piece to them. And the big thing is that it's just more of ending the silence about traumatic brain injury. I wrote for a magazine called Brain Injury Journey for about a year. They've since folded. And Marilyn Lash & Associates, I know a bunch of you guys are familiar with the name. I call her the Margaret Thatcher of the brain injury community. And I wrote for them for a while, and the publication has since seen the end of its life. But Sarah and I had kind of a vision of being able to put a publication out there where survivors, kind of like the Reader's Digest for the TBI community. And we started an online publication called TBI Hope Magazine. And that now reaches 26 nations. We've got thousands of readers. And you can go to tbihopemagazine.com. It's a free subscription. We do it all digitally. It's no overhead. You know, we sit down. A gentleman familiar with the industry said, you'll never have a shortage of people that are willing to contribute. And the funny thing is we distribute the third Monday of every month. And I looked at the calendar and went, oh my God, we're going to be in Seattle. And like we've learned that work is now no longer a location. Work can go anywhere. And we were still on New Hampshire time, so yesterday morning at 5:30 a.m., I'm sitting there queuing the publication, and it went out just at 9 o'clock on 9 o'clock Eastern time, Monday, third Monday of every month it goes out, and bam, there's the magazine out to the world. And the funny thing is, we just hit our 1-year anniversary, and it's always about what's next. What can we do next to help other TBI survivors? And earlier this year, we made the decision we're going to produce a documentary. And, I never did a magazine before, and that's working well. And so why not make a film? Why not? If things go as they should, we should have a trailer out by June, and hopefully the documentary out in public distribution by the end of the year. And think about it. The doc said, have no life, have no life. Well, a lot has happened. And I know I'm trying to be respectful of the time, and I want to close with a life does get better story, because life does get better. And if you're here today and you're thinking life will never get better, don't believe the lie. Life will get better. That window of time where my 4 children left was the darkest of my entire life. My youngest came back a couple of years ago. He ended up living with me for about a year. And he's now at Arizona State, and he left in August of last year. I cried for like 2 weeks. And he's been supportive. He gets it. He's had the chance to live with me, and he's the one when I decided it was time to try and read again. Let me get you a Goosebumps book, Dad. that'll be a story for another time. But I regained the ability to read last year. I lost it for years. Another one of those late stage changes. The ability to read came back. So I had 1 out of 4 in my life, and 3 out of 4 gone. And I cherished my relationship with Nick, but I still mourn the loss of Josh, Sean, and Dan. Sarah and I were heading to North Dakota. January, to go see my stepdaughter, and I was in an airport in Minneapolis, and my son had actually called me at an airport prior, and I texted him. I'm like, oh my God, it's Josh on the phone. I haven't talked to him in ages. And I texted him, I'm like, probably a butt dial, because you're probably not trying to reach me. And he texted back, Dad, we need to talk. So we landed in Minneapolis, and we had a few minutes, and we were doing that run from one side of the terminal to the other, because they give you like 19 seconds to cover a half a mile. And I'm like, I got to call Josh before we get on our next flight. And he picked up, and I'm like, just hearing his voice, you know. And he said, Dad, I got some news for you. He said, my daughter was born a few weeks ago, and you're now a grandfather. And it's time for us to put the past behind us and start moving forward. And I never saw it coming, but I was open and ready for him to come back if he did. And people over the years have said, just remain available, because they will come back. So if you have lives that have been fractured and family members who don't necessarily think that you're as compromised as you know you are, be patient, and life does indeed change. And I want to congratulate you guys on just an amazing conference so far. We, like I said, it was a 6-hour flight to get here, and it's just an honor and a privilege to be here sharing this space with all of you guys. I can't say I'll never forget you, but I'll try not to forget you, so thank you.
Wow. Thank you, David. That was really amazing. Yeah. The invisible injury disability, it is hard. So now we are going to be changing the ballroom into 2 salons. And also, John just let me know that you can find David in the exhibit room, and he will have his books there, and he'll be signing them. So what a wonderful opportunity. And also be sure, if you haven't already got all your little stickers on your map, grab them so that you can enter the raffle. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys at lunch, and enjoy your morning workshop.